Hi. It's, if I could see better, I probably still wouldn't be able to see anything because of the lights, but it's great to see all of you. As Marina said, I worked in the music business, which I think was during the golden years of when there still was stuff called tour support and stuff like that. But during that period, it was really boys everywhere, just boys everywhere. There were, the bands. There were the tour managers, roadies. There were the technicians, the producers, the engineers, and the execs, who 9 out of 10 times were all men. There was maybe 1 or 2 female executives at a record company thrown in just for appearance's sake, but generally it was men. And the rosters reflected the same thing. There were a handful of women artists, and there were so few that we could call them by their first names without getting them confused. There was Joni, there was Judy, there was Bonnie, Barbara, of course. There was Bet, Aretha, and that was pretty much it. There were girls at the record company and worked in the office, the gals who worked in the office, gals. They were not assistants, they were secretaries. They came in all shapes and sizes, but they were all young, they were all exuberant, they were talented. Some typed better than others, some made a really good cup of coffee. Some were more available than others, but the bottom line was, it was the gals that did most of the work and the guys who got most of the money. So it was very, very mad men. And I'm thinking that a meaningful conversation was almost an oxymoron. Men did not know how to talk to us. The record company exec told me once that after he had signed Stevie Nicks, she told him she was, his first conversation with her on the phone, she told him she was on her period, which totally flummoxed him. I mean, he was frozen. He just did not know what to say. Nonplussed is the French way of putting it. But Stevie Nicks is a smart cookie. And I think it was just her way of letting him know who was really steering the conversation. Yeah, so then I'd like to think it's different now. I'm not so sure. But at that time, quite often, no matter how clear you thought you were being, how direct you thought you were being, quite often you were misunderstood. And when the Stones did their tour in 1975, there was a party thrown for them that I worked at. It was not a press party. It was a private party. It was held at Diana Ross's house. She changed 3 times during the course of the party. But that whole party is a story for another time. But it was very, very exclusive, and they had hired big bruiser football players from USC to work the guest list at the end of the driveway. And Barbra Streisand was seeing John Peters at that time. And if any of you saw Licorice Pizza, you might know who I'm talking about. He was a hairdresser to the stars who had turned into a record producer. He had a force of nature personality. He was really something. But in spite of how many albums of hers he produced, he was still thought of as Barbara's boyfriend. And she pretty much had enough of that. She wanted to put an end to it. She insisted that he be on the guest list when she RSVP'd. It was her stipulation. So the limo pulls up. Actually, it was her Rolls. And he says, John Peters. And the poor kid in the USC t-shirt looks, I'm sorry, you're not on the guest list. And Barbara leans over and says, Oh no, it's this side. Check again. Still nothing. So they drive off in a huff. And I have to admit that I was one of the people inside who got wind of this that just rolled our eyes and said, please. And the next day, of course, the trades were full of the story of how she had driven off in a hissy fit rather than, just swallowing it and making nice. A number of years go by, and I was working, doing PR for ELO, the Electric Light Orchestra, when they came out with their Out of the Blue album, which was the biggest album of the summer. It was released on Jet Records, which was run by Don Arden. He was anecdotally famous for dangling people who displeased him out of second and third story windows. So you tried to have as little contact with him as possible. And it was avoidable because his daughter Sharon did most of the heavy lifting. Now, this was a huge event planned at Anaheim Stadium. There was various people and things that were going to be helicoptered into the stadium. And there was a post and pre-party, a big casino. It was celebs only. It was giant. And I was tasked with getting gossip column-worthy celebs to attend. So there were, I did really well. It was the hottest ticket in town. So there were B-list musicians, all the usuals. There were the A-list actors' wives. There were B-list actors. And I was really excited because I had gotten a positive RSVP from the Heartbreakers, who were soon to be superstars, but weren't yet. Now, Tom Petty wasn't interested in attending, but that was fine with me because the Heartbreakers were just the best. Of course, all of the celebs were going to be helicoptered from Santa Monica Airport to the stadium in Anaheim and back later. So all the guest lists had to be approved by Sharon because it was so expensive. And if you don't recognize the name Sharon Arden, you might know her better by her married name after she married Ozzy Osbourne. So I always kind of sweated a little before I had to talk with her, and she was fine with the guest list except for the Heartbreakers. And she told me that if they couldn't come, she wanted Tom Petty or nobody. Ick. So I had to go and call the management company and tell them, and Tom countered with he would attend only if the Heartbreakers were on the guest list. And she finally consented to that. And that was great. And the day of the show, the Heartbreakers all showed up with bells on. They had a great time, but of course, Tom did not, just as I had suspected, which of course endeared him to me and to everybody else who heard the story forever. What a guy. And in all these years later, I reflected that Barbra Streisand was doing exactly the same thing for John Peters that Tom Petty was doing for his Heartbreakers, but with very different results. Barbara was called a diva, and she just couldn't go with the flow, whereas Tom was noble. And I would very, very much like to think that things would be different today. I certainly owe Barbara an apology for my eye roll. So, sorry, Barbara. But we change, we grow. Things look different as we look back at them. And if you want proof of that, all you have to do is take one look at the giant shoulder pads and teased hair of the 80s, which of course John Peters had nothing whatsoever to do with. And that visual alone lets us know how wrong we can be about things. So thank you. Thank you.